All right, thank you very much. And I just want to briefly thank the Tulane School of Architecture for having me here, for the World Trade Center, and also the University of New Orleans for welcoming me here to talk about Symbiocity, and also to Cecilia Shellgren, who really made it possible, and she's providing the linkages between Sweden and this area. So thanks very much, and also, of course, to our sponsors. So I want to go into a little bit of background first into who I am, who the Swedish Trade Council is, and then talk a little bit about kind of what brought me here, and then, of course, we'll go into kind of the feature topic, which is Symbiocity. The Swedish Trade Council is kind of an interesting organization. It's half owned by the Foreign Ministry of Sweden and half owned by a Federation of Swedish Businesses. So our mission is to promote exports from Sweden, but also work on a kind of a more general level. So when we have initiatives with some of the ministries, we are contracted to carry out some of the initiatives to bring it kind of to the people, to be on the ground level. We have 3 offices in the US, New York, Chicago, and San Francisco. The Chicago office is the main office. We have about 10 people there. You might be asking at this point, aren't you Swedish, or why aren't you Swedish? It's a good question. We're about half Swedish staff, half American staff. We try to keep that mix to be in our clients' best interest, and also to understand the local market conditions. But the real reason I'm here is because of the Swedish-American Green Alliance. And that is an initiative that was started by the U.S. ambassador to Sweden in 2010, Matthew Barzun. And what he did is he wanted to recognize the fact that Sweden had a lot to offer the U.S. in terms of its environmental policy, in terms of its environmental technology that had been developed over many years of strict environmental legislation, but also because of Sweden's overall approach to sustainability and reducing the environmental footprint. On the flip side, of course, being the representative of the U.S., he felt that the U.S. had a lot to offer as well, especially in terms of the industrial strength and a lot of the technologies that have already been put into practice in the U.S. So in that spirit, he started the Swedish-American Green Alliance in collaboration with the Swedish government. So there's a memorandum of understanding that was signed in 2010 with the idea of facilitating knowledge exchange between the two countries. That included also sending delegations from the U.S. to Sweden, also sending Swedish delegations to the U.S. So the U.S. Embassy has really been our partner in this, and they've worked a lot to bring over U.S. mayors to Stockholm to kind of see some of the projects in Sweden in action. And we're also doing a lot of activities through Saga to kind of promote what Sweden has to offer. So there are a number of activities through Saga, including seminars at the House of Sweden in Washington, D.C. That's where the Swedish Embassy is. Also, we do a lot of monitoring of the market opportunities in Sweden as well as the U.S. And then finally, we want to talk more about the Swedish approach to sustainable urban planning. And that's really where Symbiocity comes in. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. The Symbiocity, kind of the goal of the presentation is, first, I just want to give you a little bit of background on how Sweden came to this approach that it currently practices. So I want to give you a good understanding of where Sweden came from and where it is today. Then I want to talk a little bit about the actual approach, kind of what it means, what Symbiocity means. And then finally, I just want to introduce you to the Saga network a little bit and get you involved in some of the activities. So it's really part inspiration and I think part activism. I think one thing that's also worth mentioning here is that New Orleans is a great place, I think, for Symbiocity. I think it's a really rich environment with the rebuilding process. I know there are a lot of organizations that are involved in rebuilding to make it right. There's Global Green, and they're all doing really good things at looking for a new way to kind of approach urban planning, to approach green building. So I think that's a great thing. And of course, I think one great flagship, I think, for Sweden is the new Skanska construction project for the University Medical Center, which is just a great example of Swedish ideas in play. To give a little bit of the reason, the impetus for why a new approach to thinking about urban planning is important, is the fact that on May 23rd, 2007, the world's population was more urbanized than living in rural areas. So 50% of the world's population was living in urban areas. By 2030, it's expected that 60% of the world's population will be living in urban areas. And this is really critical, especially in emerging economies. In the Wall Street Journal, just last week, they noted that the Chinese government had noted that China has already reached the point that it's more urban than rural. And to kind of highlight how things have accelerated, they pointed out that it took 500 years for Great Britain to get to that point. It took 100 years for the US to get to that point. And it's taken China 50 years to get to that point. That's 50% more urbanized. So this brings up a lot of questions, a lot of critical questions about how we deal with problems in our cities. There's the pressing issue of waste management. Finding out what should we do with the waste that collects. We have more people living in more densely populated areas. Do we really have a good way to deal with the waste? Is it just kind of kicking the can down the road, or is it a more sustainable way of doing things? There's the issue of resources, freshwater being one example. Not much of a problem here, but in places like Las Vegas and Southern California, you see a lot of critical issues in not having enough fresh water to support the city's growth. And in fact, you've seen things like rationing take place in those cities. Traffic congestion. This is a picture from Beijing. You can see the smog pretty clearly. They say that visibilities can be down to 100 feet on some days. But traffic congestion is a huge problem, especially for places like Beijing that are not equipped to support this kind of congestion. This obviously brings up questions of health. It leads to air pollution, not to mention all the lost hours and the economic drain. So really, just to sum up, a number of issues that come up with greater urbanization, which are only going to be more pressing as the world becomes more urbanized. People live closer together in cities. And due to the globalized nature of the economy, it's not expected to slow down, but rather to speed up, not just in China, but places like Brazil. So these issues are really critical. And I think what we want to do is just talk a little bit about how Sweden has kind of envisioned the approach to some of these problems. But maybe what I can do is go a little bit back in time. We'll go back 40 years, and we'll talk a little bit about what Sweden is. I think some people might have some perceptions in their mind. I think, just in talking to friends, you find out what the perceptions of Sweden is. It's a place known for kind of its greenery. It's considered kind of nice. They have a nice quality of life, highly socialized state, a lot of government healthcare. So a lot of I think conceptions about how Sweden is today. But in fact, if you go back 40 years, it really doesn't square with the reality on the ground. In the 70s, Sweden was a highly polluted place. There were a number of environmental scandals with a few chemical companies that had been burying waste. They've been burying toxic chemicals in the ground. This kind of exploded into the public consciousness. At that time, also 1972, Stockholm hosted the first UN conference on the environment. So there were kind of a lot of things that were helping to contribute to kind of a new mentality, the feeling that the country needed to come together and do something differently. To take another example, the city of Stockholm, which it's known as a pretty clean city, it was named in 2010 the green capital of Europe. The city of Stockholm, the waters are so polluted that swimming was forbidden. You wouldn't even dip a toe in it, just a lot of reasons that that Sweden was not a very good place to live. But due to some stricter legislation, some partnerships between university and industry, and also just this increasing consciousness, this belief among the politicians that they needed to do something about it. They've completely flipped the situation on its head. So today, Sweden is one of the leading nations in most, if not all, environmental indicators. And just to take a contrast, Stockholm's waters are so clean that people regularly swim in it, and they say you could even drink out of it. So it's been a complete turnaround for the country. So what we can do is talk a little bit about kind of what contributed to that. Another thing to point out is that in the 70s, Sweden was the most oil-dependent country in the industrialized world. So it was, I believe, they depended on fossil fuels for more than 70% of their energy needs. And since that time, I think this kind of illustrates the dramatic turnaround that the country saw, because from the late 70s onwards, they managed to reduce their dependence on oil 90%. And they managed to reduce their sulfur emissions to levels from before World War I. So it was really a dramatic turnaround for this country. The question that's usually asked in conjunction with this is, well, how much did they have to sacrifice in economic gain? And if you really look at the numbers, I think the numbers show that the GNP is grown quite steadily, while the country has reduced their CO2 emissions by 9% since 1993. So they haven't sacrificed their quality of life while they've made these dramatic changes. So that leads me to Symbiocity, which is the sustainable approach to urban planning. And that's really, it describes kind of the trial and error approach that Sweden has taken really since the 70s, since that time that they were a very polluted country, to the point that they are at today. So what I can do is talk a little bit about what Symbiocity means and kind of how it's put into practice. So in the urban environment, typically the problems are seen very much in isolation from one another. You have the waste, which is taken out for landfill to be dealt with. You have your sewage, your wastewater, which is taken to wastewater treatment plants, and the excess water is kind of run off. You have industry, which often is kept in isolation from the rest of the community on the outskirts of cities. So, but however, the Symbiocity approach is more about taking these problems in combination. It's a kind of a holistic way, an integrated way of looking at these kind of urban subsystems and combining the output of one to the input of the other. And what it takes really to accomplish this is a lot of collaboration between public and private stakeholders. And this is, I think, where Sweden has contributed a lot in the way of thinking about urban problems. They've been able to get the public and private stakeholders together early in the planning stages in a very participatory way to think about the best, the most integrated way forward. so that one problem is not contributing to another, but rather one issue or the solution to one issue is helping to contribute to the solution of another issue. So it's not only in the interest of environmental gain, for reducing the overall footprint on the environment, but also for economic gain, because these synergies reduce costs and help contribute to overall cost savings in the community. So just to take one example of what Sweden has done, you talk a little bit about wastewater. Black water that's a problem that's common to all communities. Black water is basically sewage water. It's everything you really can't reuse again as drinking water. So what Sweden has done is really taken a look at how to use black water in kind of the way that benefits all kind of aspects of the urban environment as much as possible. So in a typical situation, the black water is transferred to a wastewater treatment plant. A wastewater treatment plant is connected to the community through the district heating system. And in the treatment of the wastewater, the excess heat is via heat exchangers transmitted back to the community by way of steam pipes and water. And the result of that wastewater treatment is a sludge. And the sludge, in many cases, is then taken for biogas, to anaerobic digesters for biogas treatment. So that sludge is upgraded to biogas, which can be used as really the equivalent of natural gas, which then can be used for heating, for electricity production. They've also pioneered the upgrading of biogas to vehicle fuel. And that's really an area that many people looking at the potential in the U.S. have said that's an area that really can be exploited further. So by upgrading to biogas for vehicle fuel, they've been able to kind of plug that back into the public transit system to then help the community get around. So really, it's kind of taking just one output, one typical urban problem, and really getting the most out of it. So Symbiote City is not just it's not just a grand scale. I don't want to give a sense that it's something that has to be implemented on a city level. Really, it's something that can be scalable. It can apply to a community as well as an individual home. So it's not, I think, kind of a common response we get as well. This is great for new construction, or it's great when you have the ability to pre-plan, but it's really something that can be applied at kind of all levels. It's very scalable. It's more about the approach, to be thinking about sustainability on a holistic level. So one example is the way that some parts of Stockholm have dealt with waste. Looking at the best way to deal with waste, they have taken a kind of a hard look at the way that we do things with garbage collection. The city planners felt like the dependence on heavy-duty vehicles to kind of clog the streets was only contributing to traffic congestion, air pollution, noise pollution. So what Sweden has pioneered in many of its cities is the use of vacuum systems. And there's a company that's leading the charge on this called NVAC. And what it does is it's via a series of pipes, the waste from communities is transmitted back to a central processing facility. So the idea is you want to avoid as much as possible the use of trucks to go to kind of individual buildings, individual homes to pick up the garbage. And this way, by separating the the waste collection from the beginning, you're also encouraging people to recycle and to sort their own garbage. So this has been put into practice in many buildings in Stockholm, and in fact, in Stockholm, the amount of garbage that's recycled or sorted is up to 75%. So it's really borne out in the outcome. At the same time, just looking at kind of a smaller scale, you might have something as simple as the use of an existing route to pick up garbage with biodegradable plastic bags. So it's really how can we use the existing features of the system to kind of contribute to an overall healthier urban environment. So that's the overall thinking behind Symbiocity, and it's since the late 90s. These practices have been put into play by more than 60 municipalities. They call themselves eco-municipalities, and more of these are adopting the Symbiocity approach. And definitely the municipal system that governs most of Sweden's population helps, and the national government is definitely encouraging the adoption of more sustainable practices. So what I want to do is talk about one example of a project in Stockholm called Hammarby Sjöstad. And that is probably the best example, I think, of how Symbiocity has been put into practice in Sweden. So going back to 1995, Stockholm city officials, I think they had the 2004 Olympics on their minds, and they also had land that they owned around the Stockholm seaport. And they wanted to find out, how can we use this land in a good way, and how can we use this land in a way that kind of shows off what Sweden has to offer. And what they decided to do was show the world how Sweden has used Symbiocity. They wanted to really crystallize everything into one project. And so what they did with this space was that they leased it off to about 12 developers, and they got together all of the relevant city departments, the Department of Transportation, the Department of Land Use and Planning, the Department of Waste Management. And they got them together along with the architecture firms that were provided by the developers. And they sat them down and said, all right, this is the approach that we want to take. We want to reduce the environmental footprint by 50% compared to comparable buildings in Stockholm. And we want to do this by basically looking at the planning of this in a very integrated way. So by doing this from the beginning, they were able to achieve a lot of efficiencies that might not otherwise have been possible. So for example, district heating is one area where Sweden has really benefited from having kind of an efficient, more planned approach. So Hammarby Sjöstad was plugged into a district heating system. The waste collection was scrutinized really closely, and they installed the vacuum system for waste collection. The water runoff was dealt with in a good way so that it was able to be reused for irrigation. They looked at really all the steps along the way. Public transit was they made sure that the public transit not only was available for the residents, but also that it ran on renewable fuels. So it's actually used, the buses actually run on biogas that's produced from the community. So really it's kind of a good example of everything kind of coming together in one project. So currently there are about 15,000 residents here, and they expect by 2015 to have 20,000 residents. It's about 65% owner owned and 45% or 35% rental. So the result of this was a community that indeed, according to the analysis that they did, had 50% less environmental stress than comparable buildings in Stockholm, including 50% less eutrophication, 45% less ground level ozone, and 40% less water consumption. So really, they set very clear goals from the beginning. Let's keep cutting these, and they didn't want to kind of get complacent about these. So they're continuing to look at these environmental indicators and try to get them reduced even more. So it's not only a kind of this environmental wonderland, it's also a community that's considered very livable. So according to a survey they did of the residents, the 70% said that they've changed their lifestyle to become more eco-conscious, but almost all of them said that they did so without compromising their quality of life. So that's something I think we want to emphasize, that it's not just kind of a showpiece. It's actually something that people have kind of felt a part of, that they kind of want to change their behavior as a result of the different factors at play here. The economic gains from this project were also apparent. In looking at the benchmarking against similar buildings, they found that Hammarby Sjöstad had actually seen a 26% increase over comparable buildings in Stockholm in the property value. So it's something that's not only reduced the environmental footprint, but they've also seen some economic gain, the owners in this and the developers in this, not to mention the city. So today, this project is visited by thousands of delegations from around the world. Definitely, if you find yourself in Stockholm, feel free to visit. We have a nice visitor center there, and you can take a look at all the features in play. So one of the things I touched on a little bit earlier was district heating, and that is it's put into play. I know in the U.S. I think I read somewhere that 3,000 communities use district heating today. I think a lot of them college campuses are places that can really that are a little bit more planned than other parts of the country. But in Sweden, about 50% of households are heated through district heating. And for those of you unfamiliar with district heating, it's really a kind of a centralized way to distribute heat via water or steam pipes. And so it's a highly efficient way to heat households, which is obviously a problem in Sweden, which gets kind of cold. So that was. It made it a lot easier to kind of target problem areas and help wean the country off of fossil fuels, at least for heating. So with district heating, they have been able to reduce their CO2 emissions by 60% below the targets, the EU targets for acceptable CO2 emissions for heating. And they've also been able to reduce the use of fossil fuel for heating from 80%, what it was in the late 70s, to 3%. So today, a lot of the district heating centers are powered by biomass. And that's a really big area for Sweden. They use a lot of wood pellets and peats and even waste to kind of power the district heating plants and to heat their communities. So district heating has been called the quiet save of the climate change movement. They've looked at the the potential for Europe as a whole. And they found that if district heating were adopted by Europe on the scale that it's been adopted in Sweden, Europe would have achieved would have hit its CO2 targets over 4 times. The other area where district heating has helped is the use of the excess heat from industrial processes. So by looking in some parts of Sweden, northern parts of Sweden, where the pulp and paper industry is kind of a strong industry, they've been able to use the kind of excess heat from the pulp and paper production towards heating those small communities. And again, it really helps that Sweden looks at this in a very pre-planned Symbiocity type way. So this kind of way of thinking, this approach that's exemplified by Hammarby Sjöstad, has been put into play in certain parts of the world. Definitely, we get a lot of interest from the emerging markets, places that are really rapidly industrializing, that need additional housing, additional space. So China is a country that's really adopted this way of thinking in kind of a big way. There's several projects that illustrate that. And we had, we give the presentation on Hammarby to delegations from around the world, and we had a delegation from China there. And after we kind of went through the spiel on Hammarby, this guy stood up and just raised his hand and said, that sounds great. I'll take 10. And so, well, it's not really for sale as it is, but the idea is for sale. Anyway, this is something that we hope to bring to different parts of the world, not just the U.S. So, Symbiocity, just to sum up, is it's a way of thinking. Urbanization is going to continue, and that's of course going to bring many challenges. And this is just one way to approach it. What I hope people to come away with this presentation is that it's not one thing. It's a way of thinking. It's bringing all the stakeholders together that are involved in urban development and getting them to think about the total system, to think about how one urban problem might contribute to another and how one solution can help contribute to multiple solutions. So that's really what I want you to come away with. So Symbiocity is, if you want to find out more information about the kind of what we're doing, where it's put into practice, a good way to do that is by going to the Symbiocity website, and there we have a number of pieces of information about areas where it's put into practice. So in healthcare, for example, in other institutions like schools, we want to show some examples of projects where Sweden has put this into practice, but also to get people in touch with the right network. So we have a network of consultants, of urban planners, architects, as well as the companies providing the environmental technology to help enable different projects to be put into action. So here's what they call ready to offer. So if for example, you're interested in learning more about the clean water solutions, wastewater, that's a good place to start. There's also on the Symbiocity website an online SimCity type game in which you can kind of pretend to be a mayor of a town and kind of adopt the Symbiocity approach to urban planning. But yeah, I hope that at the very least it can lead to kind of a continued discussion. I hope you've been inspired in your way of thinking and in knowing more about how Sweden does it. And I think, more importantly, with the Swedish-American Green Alliance, we hope that the exchange of ideas can really continue. and we're going to have delegations between the U.S. and Sweden. Of course, visiting some of the flagship projects in Sweden, and also coming here. So definitely would encourage you to take a look at the Saga website to find out more about it, and I hope to keep in touch with all of you.